Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Fantasy Fiends podcast. My name is the podcast episode. My name is Stevie Collier, and after over 60 episodes, I still can't get the freaking intro correctly. And I'm here.
You didn't even get your name right on this one, Stevie.
Sorry, I've been drinking. No, I haven't. I learned my lesson from last podcast. It doesn't work. I can't even watch that last podcast episode. But I'm Stevie Collier, and I'm here with Andy Belliquin, author of The Last Bucellarius. Just kidding. And we're here with Joshua Rutherford. God dang it, Rutherford, right?
That's correct. Yes, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks
Awesome.
for having me.
And this is his second time on the show, so welcome back, Joshua.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
And before the show, we were talking about that Joshua just had his second little boy, and his name is Nathaniel, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Nathaniel, and the first is David. So are these biblical names though? Is that what y'all were going for?
Yeah, we were going for something, I guess, biblical, but also regal, something that had a good ring to it when choosing the names for our children. And we kind of went back and forth on a couple of them, but then those are the ones that ultimately stuck. Yeah. Yeah.
Mine was the opposite. Being born in Texas, you want to name your kid something really rednecky. So I was seriously, guys, I'm not joking, Bucky.
Oh.
But Bucky Collier, because I had big teeth when I was born, and I still have big teeth. Bucky Collier, and I don't know, I think I'd be kind of cool to be named Bucky. It's a name you don't forget, and it's also a name you can laugh at too, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to start a new tradition. Andy, maybe you would want to help me out with this, but it is a typo of the week while you're editing your book, or if you're writing your book, something that's funny that, that came up while you're writing. And mine today is sandwiches. Apparently, I don't know how to write the word sandwiches, and I wrote it as sandwiches, like a witch of the sand. And I was laughing so hard by myself, and it was so sad because it's just me laughing at something stupid I did. It wasn't even funny. So I just was wiping tears, and I was like, "Oh God, I'm so alone."
Yeah.
I think the biggest typo that I've done, I was writing a military fantasy novel, and I misspelled the word lieutenant literally every time I typed it out, and in like 5 or 6 incredibly creative ways, to the point where I couldn't even Google search or search the document to find the ones that I had misspelled. It was 10 different variations on the misspelling of lieutenant. It was terrible.
You had to search it by ANT or something.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad I'm not the only one with that word, because that seriously is terrible. It's a terrible word to try. And for some reason, Josh, mine is definitely. I for some reason cannot spell definitely.
Oh.
I don't know why. And I use it all the time, like when texting people and stuff. I'm just like, God dang it, I can't do this right. So today we have a very interesting topic. It's one that we haven't done before. We've discussed it during many of our podcasts, and that is traveling and its effectiveness when being a fantasy author. And there's just a lot of ways we can go about this. And I kind of want, Joshua, do you kind of want to just take the reins here? And, was this your topic idea?
It was. Yeah. Thank you, Stevie. This was my topic idea because in my own personal life, and then of course this is transcended and affected my writing, traveling has been a primary influence and just your entire world perspective. I remember when I first traveled overseas, and this was going back to maybe I was just out of college. It was just so enlightening to see, and I went to Western Europe, but it was so enlightening to see the Louvre or Notre Dame, as well as other icons in Europe. You of course can see the pictures on your laptop anytime, just by Googling and whatever, but to actually see those things in person, and it just blows your mind away.
It's different.
Oh yeah.
It is so different. But Joshua, how do you explain it though? How do you explain that feeling when you're looking at, did you go to Rome?
Well, yes, I've been to Rome as well. Yeah.
For me, the biggest thing that I saw that I could have stood there all day was the Colosseum.
Right.
But how do you explain that feeling you get when you're actually in front of something like that? The magnitude of the feelings that you get.
It's definitely awe-inspiring. I mean, if we
Awe-inspiring,
can, yeah, do a hyphenated word to put that into that emotion into language, it's awe-inspiring because you are just there having this experience. It's just not looking or feeling or listening to everything that's around you. It's also realizing that you're having a visceral event in your life, something that you're never going to forget. And it's something that you built up in your mind. And maybe when you get there, if you built it up too much, maybe it's a letdown. But I think for the vast majority, to look at a huge monument or an edifice or just a landmark that has so much historical, religious, or other significance, it just, you have to take a moment and just digest that. And there's not too often in our lives that we can really do that. Beyond travel. I mean, when you travel, you set aside time for a vacation, or maybe it's for business or whatever, but you set aside time just for that one experience. So you're so much more committed and focused and present and in the moment. I mean, there's an entire genre of writing on it, travel writing, and many travel writers have spent years or decades trying to encapsulate that in words, and some have succeeded, some have failed, but they continue to try. But ultimately it's all very awe-inspiring to see those things in person.
And I think that's one thing that a lot of fantasy novels really try to capture is that breathtaking majesty of these, whether it's natural formations like, a Mount Everest-esque mountain peak in the fantasy world, or, a floating city in the sky, or some monument created by an ancient race or whatever. Like we've all had those experiences where we've looked up, whether it's, I saw the Tokyo Bridge. That was one of the first breathtaking or massive sized monuments that I'd ever seen, and it was just like, okay, this is something that is so big, so immense, it's almost impossible for my mind to fully understand everything that went into it. Like if you take any the Golden Gate Bridge or the Colosseum, let's say the Colosseum, how many tons of stone went into that? How many hours of work was used to build it? How much mortar, how much, all of those different things that were used to build it. It's just this number that our minds just cannot comprehend. And I think that's one reason that we're so staggered by it, is just so immense.
First of all, Joshua, holy crap, I could totally tell. Actually, both of y'all, it's just y'all's words, man. That was beautiful. It was beautiful the way, and I'm just over here, Texas hillbilly, can't talk at all. So what, just right out of the box, the Colosseum was huge for me, literally. And it is featured in 2 novels. I wrote about the Colosseum in my first book, The Four Territories, and it's made of obsidian rock. So I changed it a lot, and made it a lot bigger. I think I made like triple or quadruple the size. And then I was so in love with the idea of a Colosseum that I wrote it again in the 3rd novel and based the whole book around it. And that is Esh's son having to fight in there with no food or water, but no food until he died in battle, which I can't tell you if that happens or not. But and it's something, sadly, that I took for granted, that hey, Stevie, the reason why you wrote this is because you were so inspired by it when you saw it in person. And not only that, but when you walk into it and you realize, geez, a lot of people died here. And, you just kind of wait there. I'm big on energy. A lot of people who watch the podcast or watch the show, know that. And so I kind of like to shut my eyes and be like, wow, there were people here screaming and shoving each other, wanting to see this blood. And yeah, so I'm glad we're doing this topic today, because I didn't realize how much I used it. And there's other things I could talk about, but I want to turn it over to someone else. So, Joshua, what is something that has there been like something that you've seen that inspired your writing specifically?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, well, just to reference the book that we're talking about now, my latest book, Kinghood, there's something about walking a castle parapet. You know, you're going between the crenellations, and I'm referring to Edinburgh Castle.
I'm actually what's a parapet?
You know, kind of like the walkway. Of the castle, inner castle. So like where like guards and archers would like.
Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and you know your head is just kind of bobbing along, and you're going through the crenellations. You know, kind of the blocks of the castle
where they shot the arrows out of.
Exactly, yeah. Or you're you know going up a spiral staircase within a tower, and you're seeing the arrow slits and everything like that. I remember specifically having those experiences in the Tower of London and Edinburgh Castle and Prague Castle, and I thought to myself, you know, I really need to do a fantasy narrative where I'm talking, where I'm describing these experiences of, you know, feet hitting the stone, of, you know, taking a quiver and just, you know, firing an arrow through an arrow slit, or of running down the corridors, you know, in preparation for battle. And I just remember that, just thinking to myself, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this. And that really inspired my writing. And I didn't really have the idea at the time I was traveling. Kinghood came up as an idea probably about a year and a half ago, is when it first came to fruition. But the kernels, the seeds of having that love for just medieval fantasy and just medieval history in general, knights and squires and war horses and armor and catapults and trebuchets. I mean, that just seeing, yeah, just seeing.
Was this your first book?
Hmm?
Was it your first book that you were when you were walking through the parapets of the castle? Had you written your first book yet?
Let's see. I believe, yeah, my first book was out.
Okay.
Yeah, and my second one was not. And then the third one was not even a kernel of idea, but I just, it was the longing, the aspiration was there. It planted the seeds for me wanting to write a fantasy novel like Kinghood. You know, that epic fantasy, that medieval fantasy. Definitely.
So I lived half of my life in California, and I know we're talking Western Europe, but you know, what about the U.S.? You know, I'm now that I'm thinking about it, I was stuck in a moment of my life, or a time of my life, where you know you have this novel idea, but you won't sit down to write it. You just keep pushing it back. You're like, oh, I need to get some more ideas. And I was like 15 when I first tried to write. And do you guys know Lake Castaic in California? Well, it's this huge lake, and lots of big bass, so bass fishing. That's why I was there. But I had a little notebook with me. I was 15 years old, and I remember the sun going, you know, setting, and I was like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And I remember writing in my little notebook, and then my brother pushed me and it fell in the water. Oh, no. Along with any hopes of me ever writing a novel until I was 23 years old. So I've always, whenever I saw something cool growing up, it was my mind always went to, I could write a story about that. And you know, it just took until I was at a more mature age before I could actually sit my wiry butt down and actually write something down. But another thing about traveling that I think is important is the people and meeting new cultures. And I believe that's also really good for coming up with new character ideas and new races and stuff like that. Andy, do you have any experience like that?
Well, you know, growing up in Japan and then living in Mexico,
Two completely different places.
Yeah, you know, like they're such diametric opposites. So then you can kind of infuse different aspects of them into the characters. Or I've wanted to write a Japanese sort of setting, like you know, being familiar with a lot of the Japanese culture and armor and castles and architecture and, you know, city layout and stuff, and then of course, you know, the whole samurai I can't remember the name, but sort of the way of life, the lifestyle, and all that. It's really been an interesting idea that I haven't yet figured out what I want to write, because it's a really complex subject because of the whole samurai system, the code of honor and all of that. But it's one that I've wanted to write. But I find myself like writing characters that are a lot more like brash and open, which is a very Latin thing. Here in Canada, I've been in Canada for a couple of months, and people are very reserved. They're very polite. And it's so not like that in Latin America. It's just like everybody's just straight up in your face, in a friendly way. And of course, in a very, if it's conflict, it's just right out in the open. Whereas here it's much subtler. So you definitely take on those personality traits of the people where you live.
The newest book that I'm writing now, for all the people, a little like fun fact, all the cities are named in Japanese because I study Japanese. So something like an achievement for myself. I actually knew the words for like forest and jungle and sand. And actually not just Japanese, I did French names as well, but a lot of the names in this book are based in Japanese. And the jungle kingdom of Shimo is a Japanese culture place. So each of these kingdoms has a different, like one will be more like Arabic Muslim. And but this one, which I've had a ton of fun, is Japanese. So everything's very orderly and clean. And a lot of the color red and big, now I can't, like archways, just Asian architecture. So this is my first book, and Andy probably will believe this is the first book I've actually done research on. And something I wanted to add to this podcast before I forget, and that is, if you can't go to the place that you want to go to and you have an idea for a setting, Google search it. Get an image. And I've been doing that now, and holy crap, my settings have been so much better because there's, like Joshua said, it's how do you describe something? So when you're describing something in an image, you're not going to be like copywriting that image, but you're going to come up with something completely different, even though, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So definitely. Like if you're trying to describe Mount Everest, you're going to get something completely different in your novel. So it's going to be something new. It's been really fun for me to do. It's a cool creative process for me.
Yeah, I've done that a lot. A lot of my cities in my world have been, not traditional European architecture, but I've gone to Arabic style cities. The world I'm in right now is Egyptian. So playing with Egyptian styles of architecture and decorations and, of course, materials and culture and stuff like that. And, of course, I've never been to Egypt. I've never lived in ancient Egypt. So it's sort of,
are you sure?
It's doing a lot of research to really get a feel for it. And then, people who are very, people who are Egyptian history buffs will be like, oh, I recognize that or that. But people who haven't, they'll get the Egyptian flavor, but then it will have my own unique spin on it. And so it will take something very familiar and make it unique. And really, that's what makes fantasy so awesome, is that you can do these things. You're not limited to, the details. Like if you're writing historical fiction, you've got to get every detail just right. If you're writing, a modern thriller, you've got to make sure that the architecture is exactly what it's like. The streets are laid out the way they are now, or else readers are going to be like, nope, that's wrong. Whereas in fantasy, you can take what you can take the culture, the customs, history, and you can incorporate it into fiction, and it makes something almost more amazing, more fantastical and spectacular.
Do you guys ever feel bad for other genres? You're like, hey, you have to go by the book, but I don't. Like historical fiction, I bet that would be so hard to write. Because everything has to be like proper to a certain extent. I feel like you have to be really good at history to be able. We had a guy on the podcast who did that. Andy, remember he did historical mystery?
Yeah, Asaph Mayer.
He knows his stuff. Like he pretended like he didn't, but if you asked him a question, boom, he knew the answer. I'm like, oh my God, this guy is too much. He's awesome. So Joshua, I'm really sorry I didn't plug your books at the beginning of the podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about them?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, I'm happy to, definitely describe them in detail. So Kinghood is as I said, medieval fantasy, and it's about these four brothers. They're identical quadruplets, And they were born in a time of war, intrigue, assassination, and their birth was considered by their family to be a miracle. However, there was, at the time of their birth, real concern that their family, that their dynasty would be killed off as a result of the war, especially through assassination. So their father, the king, made a very controversial but very firm decision that even though he had four identical quadruplet sons, he would tell the kingdom that he only had one. And the four sons would just rotate in the guise of one prince, Prince Jameson, so that if anything were to happen to one of the sons, if they were poisoned, if they were assassinated through some other means, the bloodline would live on. And that is really the foundation, the background of kinghood. So that when we are taken to the narrative, when the novel starts, these four brothers, they're about 19 years of age, and they've been doing this for their entire lives. They've been living this secret and been keeping their real identity apart from the rest of the kingdom. And only a few people within their family, as well as this secret subculture that they created, even know of their real existence. And that's where we find ourselves in kinghood.
I love that's, in my opinion, it's unique because I've met, over 60 fantasy authors now, and I've yet to see something with four brothers, right? They're brothers, they're sons?
They're brothers, yeah.
Four they're brothers.
Quadruplets, yeah.
I watch an anime called One Piece, and there's something similar, but I don't think anyone here has watched that because it's like 700 episodes in. So anyway, so why is he hiding the children and and he's just saying that he has one son?
Because of the constant, when we are starting the novel, they actually the kingdom is in the middle of a 100-year war. In fact, I based it on, since we're talking about history, on the 100 Years' War between France and England. And within the novel, it's called the Century War. And this king has been fighting, and not to give too much away, but he's the last within his family. All his siblings have been killed through assassination and other mysterious circumstances. So it's just the king, and then his father, who's very much aged, and then his wife is just about to give birth. Now, the wife gives birth to four identical quadruplets, and the king has just returned from the continent, having taken some time away from battle, and he knows that there's a very real potential that his heirs, his children, could be targeted for assassination. And if that were to happen, then the dynasty, the kingdom, the royalty of their kingdom will just be completely wiped out. So he makes the very controversial decision that in case one of them, ate a meal, it was poisoned, or if they drank something and they started choking and just didn't wake up one day, that there would still be a Salis water, that's the family name, to continue on the bloodline, the legacy.
What is that name?
Salis water.
Salis water?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I'm guessing there's history behind that name as well. Or did you make that up?
I made that up. Yeah, I
like it. I like it a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I don't want to steal it.
Yeah. Well, within the fantasy world of kinghood, there's very much a maritime history that I weaved into all of the families. The kingdom, Marland, it's one of those kingdoms where it has fishermen, it has merchants. It's very much, it's almost like England. It's like just tied to the water. And then all the kingdoms that they interact with, at least in this first book, they also have a maritime heritage. And I really weave that into the names, into their experiences, as well as their heritage and their culture to create the fantasy world of kinghood.
So you're an outliner, basically.
Yeah. For this novel, I definitely outlined quite a bit, and my notes section, kind of all the lineage and the background of all the characters and their families, I invested a lot of time before I even wrote the first chapter or the prologue.
You know what? You first of all, my second book's gonna have some maritime stuff in it, so I might be contacting you
Okay.
for some questions. Um, Question for both of you guys. Something that I've noticed is I can't go anywhere in life, vacation or not, without fantasy on my brain. So I can't just enjoy something without figuring out how I can turn it into a story.
Mhm.
Question one, do you guys have this problem? And two, does it bother you?
I
Does the
would.
question make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. Andy, did you want to kick it off, or did you?
No, go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, great. I'd say I have a similar problem, and I wouldn't call it a problem. I'd just call it a perspective,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Of really, when I travel, kind of looking through a lens and trying to appreciate something from a narrator or from the perspective of a storyteller. Because I can only imagine that, again, we're talking about these grand monuments, and it doesn't have to be man-made monuments. They can be something completely natural. You're mentioning your time in California, the time up at the lake. I actually, and Andy mentioned Egypt, and one of the trips that I took that really gave me that experience from both a monumental and as well as a natural landscape experience was going to Egypt myself and just
Oh,
cruising down the
nice.
Nile. Yeah, and I mean, if you've never gone down the Nile, I mean, as great as the pyramids were, the Great Sphinx, and all the Valley of the Kings, and all those monuments and temples and everything. Uh, my favorite experience from that trip was actually just being on the Nile and just kind of just imagining the experiences of ancient Egypt, of ancient Egyptians, as they're doing anything so mundane as fishing or washing their clothes or harvesting or preparing for the next flood season. And that storyteller within me, that just
Mhm.
really kind of took off, and it made me appreciate things such as travel and such as the everyday experiences, in this case of ancient Egyptians, all the more.
What
So
was the temperature like? I'm sorry, I'm just picturing it in my head now. Was it hot?
actually, we went in the winter
Okay.
specifically to avoid that heat, and it didn't get hot till the end of our trip. And it's funny because our tour guide, he said that the week before we visited, it actually snowed in southern Egypt.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and because it was closer, southern Egypt is closer to the Ethiopian highlands, where I guess the temperatures can dip. And even though the snow didn't stick, kind of like here in Southern California, which I'm sure the two of you are familiar with,
Hmm.
just the fact that it was that cold, you don't imagine snow in Egypt. But yeah, I guess somewhere where he had given a tour, it had actually snowed, not stayed, but it had
Yeah.
dipped that low.
You're in SoCal right now?
I am.
LA or San
San
Diego?
Diego. Mhm.
Okay, cool. I love surfing San Diego, by the way. It's
Yeah.
probably my favorite place to surf. Andy, what did you think? Thank you very much, Joshua. That was awesome.
Yeah, basically what he said. No matter where I go, I can't turn that off. No matter what I'm doing, I'm looking at it through the lens of that fantasy perspective.
Yeah.
Like going to a lake and just thinking what it would be like to live near a lake, and seeing the pristine beauty without the all the human rubbish that people have left. But then what would the people use it for? Or what sort of problems would crop up around the lake? Just things like that. Like it's impossible to shut it off, and I don't
It
consider it a
is.
problem either.
Well, okay, so why I asked if it was a problem was, and I'm glad you said it's impossible to shut it off. There have been times in my life where I should have been more serious. I should have, not been thinking, oh, that's a good story idea. And it was morbid. Like my grandma went into a diabetic coma for a couple of minutes, and all I could think about was, not like, oh, I'm gonna make money off this baby. No, just like, wow, this is terrifying. I want to save this feeling. I want to save this look on my grandma's face. Um, so there was that time, and I don't know whether to feel ashamed of it or not. And another is just like arguments with people and wanting to save that emotion that I was feeling and the words that I said and the words that I heard. And it's just like, wow, this fantasy thing, this storytelling in me is so ingrained in my spirit that even things like this, I'm in that mindset. And so that's why I have a little notebook with me at all times. But it's something I'm still wondering about because I can't do anything without thinking about it, you know, or finding new characters to write about. But so what do you think? So have hearing new languages in these countries, has that ever inspired you to create a new language? Or because I'm trying to take all aspects of travel and how we incorporate that into our writing. And for me, language is huge. Anyone who watches this show knows that that's the first thing that I enjoy doing at a new country is listening to the language.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I hear a new language, I really have to pause because even when you travel internationally, like especially at an airport or a train station, you're going to hear English. And I remember when our tour group going back to the trip to Egypt, we went down to southern Egypt. That's when it really felt like a completely different country. I mean, Cairo is a very metropolitan city by comparison. Southern Egypt, you are having an experience that you can't really put into words. And I remember specifically listening to people down there speak Arabic, and then going back to some of my other trips, if you go down to Barcelona, you're hearing Spanish, Catalan, and in addition to hearing these languages, to see the way that they're actually spelled, and then to make that connection, and whether it's Arabic script or
which is beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
So gorgeous.
Yeah,
and hard, very difficult.
Yeah, or even to touch upon a fantasy favorite, Welsh. Last year, my wife and I took our first son before our second son was born through a trip through England, Wales, and Ireland. I remember seeing Welsh spelled for the first time, and I cannot describe it. It's like I'm probably getting this all messed up, but there's consonants everywhere. There's letters where there shouldn't be, and of course they're in English and Welsh. And to make the connection between the two, it just at the time it just boggled my mind. I'm sure, of course, like any language, there's a logic to it, but just it really kind of threw me off just to see that, even though I was expecting to see writing. And
I think you described it very well. It does look like it has like tons of. I'm looking at it right now, and it does look like it's got a lot of content. It's like, how do you even pronounce all that stuff? Quick question: did your wife have to wear a shawl or something while you were in Europe, or is there an understanding for that? And I'm actually ignorant when it comes to Egypt. It's did she have to wear any special like religious shawl or anything?
Yeah, when we were in Egypt, not necessarily, because we were in a tour group. Now, we didn't, during our tour group, well, it's funny, we actually got there a little late. There was a flight incident where we got there a day later. So we didn't actually visit any mosques. But the expectation is that if you were to go into a mosque, maybe you'll cover up your head.
Okay.
But I think Egypt is, I guess, international enough where there's not that expectation.
Okay.
And especially in the touristy areas, our last stop on our trip was actually to the Red Sea, which which surprised me to see the signs were in English, Arabic, and Russian, because that part of the Red Sea is kind of like the Caribbean here to us in the United States. I mean, it's filled with Russian tourists. So like an area
cool.
like that would be a little bit more liberal, not say enforce cultural or social norms such as covering up, because it's there's not only Americans visiting, but quite a few Russians and Eastern Europeans visiting as well. So kind of having that international flavor really dictates how closely you mirror local customs.
I'd love to keep talking, but I feel like we have to get to the reading. Don't you think, Andy?
Yeah, I definitely think so.
I feel like you haven't talked at all, Andy. Is that my fault?
No, it's just you guys are better traveled than I am.
But you lived in Japan, though.
Yeah.
That's freak. And you're in Canada now, eh?
Well, it's like I can talk about those 3 countries where I lived, but
But you've actually had to assimilate.
yes, it's definitely a
Which
very different
hard.
thing than just
You
being
actually, dude, you speak Spanish because you lived in Mexico. To me, as like the most classic white boy, that seems crazy. So
it is something that you just kind of take for granted, and then when you look back, it's like,
yeah.
holy shit, I did that. I lived in Mexico for 16 years.
16 years? Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Hola, señor, ¿cómo estás? I sound
Not
Hispanic.
bad. Not bad.
Really?
Not great, but not bad.
You son of a gun. All right, all right. I'm not going to embarrass myself anymore. Let's get this actually because I do really want to read Joshua's work right now. It better be good, Joshua.
I hope it is too, for that matter.
It will be. I remember it from last time. It was really good because we don't ask people back that have horrible stories.
Well, I appreciate that.
Andy and I have a voting at the end. Let me get this up real quick.
A whole Hunger Games thing going on in the background once we hang up from our guests.
We just talk crap about them. Let's see. Okay. So do you want to, Joshua, do you want to tell us a little bit about what we're about to read?
Yeah, of course. So
Okay.
this is actually going back to what we were talking about earlier, where the 4 sons, the quadruplets, are just about to be born. And it revolves around the king, Audemars, their father. He's just returned from overseas. He's just returned from his campaign. And he arrives just when his wife is giving birth. And he comes in, there's a storm outside, he's all disheveled, and he comes in to find his wife giving birth. His father is there, the previous king, and he's trying to wrap his head around everything that's going on. I should also mention too that the king doesn't know anything about the birth itself. He doesn't know how many children are going to come out, if it's going to be a boy or a girl.
Okay.
So he knows nothing at this point, except that his wife is giving birth. Yeah.
Okay. Andy, do you want me to narrate or would you?
I think Josh was a fantastic narrator. I know that from last time.
He was. I remember that actually.
Okay.
How about
Josh was like, oh no.
I'll be Audemars, Steven. You can be the father and the wife.
Okay. Sounds good. Hold on, my computer's all right, there we are. Okay, I'm good to go.
Ooh, what accents are we doing, Josh?
So think with this kingdom, if you can think very subtle English accents,
Okay.
not over the top, not kind of don't emphasize it too much, just very subtle. And I guess less on the accents and more, this is a very dramatic scene.
All right.
Keep that in mind.
Okay.
Okay.
I love the direction here. Like this, you've given the best direction so far out of all the authors.
Okay.
Like you knew what you wanted. You knew what you wanted. I love that.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Are we ready to get started?
Hit it.
Yep.
Great. Audemars hurried from the bailey up the stairs to the covered parapet on the 2nd floor. Upon reaching the top of the staircase, a servant girl nearly ran into him. She averted his stare, muttered an apology, and hurried on her way. Audemars paused, not to reprimand her, but because the blood-stained linen she carried garnered his attention. His mind racing with the worst of possibilities, he marched down the parapet, his wet boots striking the tiles, their sound echoing through the hall. The noise quickened, as did his legs. Audemars found himself breaking into a trot, then a run. The stone hall reverberated his panic, shouting back with the sounds of clapping hard leather against stone. He took the stairs of the corner tower 2 at a time. Servant girls parted as he rushed past. He nearly plowed one back up the stairs when 2 strong arms finally caught him.
Son.
Audemars stopped. He stared up at his father. who stood on the step above, looking down at him. Angst washed over his face, robbing his typically bright disposition of color. Many more lines had formed in the creases of his face, particularly around his eyes, even though only 4 months had passed since his father visited him on the front.
Father,
Ottomer said, before looking past him, to the heavy oaken door only steps away.
let me pass. I have to see her.
She has lost much blood.
Artis warned, his voice cracking. His hands held Ottomar by the shoulders, unsure of whether to ease their grip to allow him to pass or to tighten so as to comfort.
The mage.
Comforts her as we speak.
And the child?
Artis lowered his shoulders, the same ones that for years had remained high and strong under mail and armor.
The child struggles. It is still within her.
A cry rang from beyond the door out into the hall. Those servant girls waiting outside placed their index and middle fingers of their right hands to their foreheads before bowing to pray. Ottomar laid his hands on his father's shoulders. Artis, knowing he could do nothing more to prepare his son for what lay beyond, released him. Ottomar made his way to the door. Each step seemed heavier than the one before, as though he were plodding through a bog. By the time he reached the door, his strength had drained, as had most of his resolve to enter, for fear of what awaited him on the other side. Then his wife screamed. The door parted, the floor contracted, so that Ottomar had but to step and find himself past the mage, at his wife's side. His hand caressed her temple, then her hair, all of which lay drenched in sweat.
My love,
she whispered.
Eleonora.
Ottomar replied, as all other words vanished from his mind. He extended his hand around her to cradle her head. Never before had it felt so light, so absent of vigor, of life.
Your Majesty.
Ottomar looked over his shoulder to the mage, a man of noble birth who had not yet seen his 30th year.
Which one are you?
Ottomar asked incredulously.
Wystan, from Harkin, Danvers.
Very well, Danvers. Leave us and fetch the royal mage. Your services are no longer needed.
But...
Are you blind? How dare you allow her to lose so much blood?
Wystan retreated from the bed as Artis returned to the chamber.
My son.
Artis said.
The royal mage died in his sleep 3 nights ago.
He what?
Mage Seer was well along in years. His time had come. We sent couriers to every manor in the kingdom, pleading for the best mages to make haste to the castle to help with the birth. Mage Wystan here was the first to answer the call, and the one most versed in healing. He stopped the bleeding.
Eleonora added.
More than a few times, at least those I recall.
Forgive me, my lord.
Ottomar begged humbly, bowing his head.
I am in your debt.
There is no apology needed, my king.
Eleonora gripped her swollen stomach and screamed. The sheets before her open legs, recently changed, turned red as they soaked up her blood.
Mage!
Ottomar yelled.
Maidens!
Wystan commanded to those outside. At once, a retinue of maidens entered the quarters with clean sheets and pitchers in their hands. Wystan urged them to his side. Ottomar, his arms supporting Eleonora, could only watch as Wystan washed his hands and changed the sheets, all the while barking orders.
I will need you. Yes, you, girl. Take this cloth and apply pressure there. Then you fetch that saltwater root oil I showed you earlier, and the birthing serum. Yes, those vials over there.
A girl grabbed the vial rack from the corner table and swung around, only to have it slip from her hands. The momentum sent the vials flying out of the rack, all of which shattered on the floor.
You stupid wench!
Wyston screamed.
Go! Get out of here!
He pointed to another maiden.
You! Yes, you!
Mage,
Audemars urged.
there is no more time.
Wyston and Audemars looked up upon Eleanor's face, which contorted in agony. Through her pain, though, she nodded.
Now.
She whispered.
Now.
Wyston rolled up his sleeves higher than necessary as he edged towards Eleanor's open legs. He glanced at the king for approval before venturing to reach out and touch the queen. Audemars, in return, nodded.
My queen.
Wyston said.
You will need to push.
Eleanor stared at the mage and blinked once. She took a deep breath. Audemars, with his hand outstretched, felt his wife's fingers wrap and tighten within his. With his other hand, he touched her swollen stomach. She pushed. Then she screamed. Audemars would scarcely go on to remember what happened after. He knew it involved more anguish on the part of his wife, along with more worry on his. The only part that remained imprinted in his memory was a single sound. The cry of a newborn. The maidens handed Mage Wyston linen after linen, allowing him to wipe off the fluid and blood from the babe. Then they offered the mage cloths soaked with warm water so as to wash the prince clean. After that, a maiden gave the mage a length of velvet cloth, which the mage used to wrap and swaddle the lad.
Your Majesty,
Wyston announced.
I present to you your child, a son, the Prince of Marland.
Audemars extended his arms as the mage placed his kin before him. The child neither squirmed nor cried as he looked up and focused. The babe lifted his arm, his miniature fingers picking at the stubble on Audemars' chin. Audemars, ablaze in jubilation, pivoted to turn to his wife. Wyston caught the king by the arm.
My king,
he whispered. Audemars paused. The mage, stricken with concern, gazed from the king to the queen.
What?
Audemars asked, his voice tinged with anxiety.
What is it? And to find out what it is, you gotta go read the book.
That was unsettlingly awesome. Wow, I was biting my freaking fingers. God. Okay, I'm guessing you've seen a childbirth before, right?
Two of them, yes.
Oh my lord, like I was nervous. Woo! To think I'm gonna have to do that one day. Oh my gosh.
Oh, you will, yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna be tough for her, and on the inside I'm gonna be screaming like, oh my god.
Just stay up by the head.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, I will. You know, they sometimes they ask you to come around and look. And I don't know if I can.
Yeah.
I'll stay by the wife and hold her hand.
Oh man.
Man, that was awesome. Again, Joshua. Great job. Great job.
I appreciate that, guys. Thank you for your support and for lending the voices. Yeah, it really made it come to life.
Thank you, man. Really pretty. Andy, oh my god, that voice was so sexy.
It's I like to call it my bedtime voice.
Yeah. So now we can say that I've given birth to your child.
we certainly could not say that, Stevie. Let's never ever say that.
No, that's gonna be our new thing.
All right, Bucky.
Oh, I should not have told you that. Okay, so hey, Joshua. So where can people find you, man?
Oh, they can find me on Facebook. I do have a Facebook page. It's author JKR. That's also my Twitter handle at author JKR. And then I have my website. It's authorjkr.net, and they could find me there as well. I'm on Amazon. Kinghood is available, and it is available on Amazon as of a few weeks ago. The official launch is going to be August 29th, and that's going to be pretty special. It's going to be available for a discounted rate, at least the Kindle version. So yeah, come on August 29th. Yeah, check it out, and yeah, pick up a copy and go from there.
Awesome.
And that isn't his only book. He also has Midnight, and as well as Sons of Chednia. Am I saying that right? Chednia?
Yeah, Sons of Chenia. Yeah.
Chenia, okay. So go ahead and check those out as well. So if you're on Amazon, look up Joshua Rutherford. That's Rutherford. Again, that's Rutherford. This is the second time we've had Joshua on the air. We'd love to have you a third time whenever you get the chance.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, Andy, Stevie, thank you so much for having me a second time, as you said. It's been a lot of fun, and especially that reading. I really think, the three of us, we breathed life into that thing, and yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Andy and I live for the readings.
Yeah, it's the best part.
Yeah. Andy, anything else you want to add?
No, that's it. Our guest on Thursday is going to be Aaron Hodges, dragon author. We're going to talk about something really cool, something to do with environmental science. He's a master's degree in environmental science, so we're going to find a way to somehow bring that into fantasy. I still haven't figured out how, but it's going to happen.
We can do it. We can make anything into fantasy, I promise you.
Exactly.
I'll figure out a way. Joshua, man, thank you so much for being on the air with us. It's always a pleasure having you, and we're definitely going to get you back on the air again. I won't allow you not to come back.
Okay. I appreciate
Double negative.
Okay. I appreciate that, guys. Thank you so much, Steve and Andy.
Well, Andy, it's been good seeing you again. You're sexy as usual. I love giving birth to your child. Let's name him Bucky.
That is, Steve, you got to dial back the weirdness by like 10% at least.
Maybe 15.
Yeah.
Because 10% is still pretty weird.
All right, do the sign off, Stevie, before you take us down any more weird paths.
I miss your smell. I miss your musk. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Fantasy Fiends podcast. We really appreciate you sticking with us, even though it got weird at a couple spots because of Andy. We love you all. We hope you have a great night. We'll see you this Thursday. Thanks again, Joshua.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.